Why are we insisting on the word happiness? Because we're thinking long-term here. We're thinking about a revolution in the way people think about the good life. A revolution in terms of the way people think and pursue life's ultimate currency: happiness. Happiness studies as a field focuses on much more than positive psychology. In fact, it focuses on much more than psychology. It looks at what philosophers had to say about the good life, and it looks at theology and neuroscience and history and economics and film and literature. What we decided to do at the Happiness Studies Academy is salvage happiness. In other words, help people understand the true, the deep, the real meaning of a happy life. Precisely to talk about the fact that a happy life is about pleasure, and it's also about a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And it's about relationships and generosity and giving. And it's about intellectual well-being. It's about learning. And if we, through education, teach people that happiness is about pleasure, and happiness is about meaning, and it's about relationships, and it's about physical health, and it's about intellectual development. When people truly understand that all these elements make up the concept of happiness, then they will be more likely to pursue that, more likely to attain it, more likely to help others attain it, more likely to create a better world. Welcome all. It's so wonderful to see you here, to have you here today. I must say, every time we have these events and I look at where people are from, I'm filled with a deep sense of awe. And, we have people from Zambia and Canada and Oregon, Mexico, Peru, Puerto Rico, Florida, Columbus, Ohio, Colombia. Incredible. So welcome all from wherever you are and whenever you are. Just a few words before we introduce our dear guest about the Happiness Studies Academy. So what the Happiness Studies Academy is about, we offer certificate program in happiness studies, which is a year-long process. We offer a master's degree in happiness studies, the world's first, and for now only. I hope not for long, that there'll be others sprouting around the world. And our main goal is what I've come to see as bridging the ivory tower and Main Street. In other words, to bring the research, the academic work done in universities, in laboratories, and make it accessible and apply it. Now, today's guest, Professor Arthur Brooks, is the ultimate bridge between the ivory tower and Main Street. That is what he's dedicating his life to. He's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Harvard Business School, where he teaches courses on both leadership and happiness. He's also a columnist at The Atlantic, where he writes the popular weekly How to Build a Life column. Arthur is also the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 13 books, including Build the Life You Want, to 2023. He's co-author, you may have heard of, Oprah Winfrey. He's also written From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. Now, Arthur is also one of the world's leading experts on the science of human happiness. He appeared on media, travels the world to teach people in private companies, in universities, public agencies, and faith communities how they can live happier lives and bring greater well-being to others. So, in order to help us bridge the ivory tower in Main Street in the field of meaning and purpose. I'm thrilled to welcome Arthur Brooks. So great to see you here.
Thank you, Tal. What a delight it is to be with you and all of our friends from around the world, as you mentioned, from Columbus to Columbia. How wonderful that is. It's to talk about our favorite subject, which is happiness. And of course, they're here because of what you've built, Tal. And what you've built has been decades in the making. The reason that I study happiness is in no small part because of your work. You have set so many ships sailing since you basically pioneered this field in happiness studies a long time ago when you were working on your dissertation at Harvard University and then beyond. It's just an extraordinary thing that you've built. And the fact that I can have any success in it is in no small part because of what you made possible. So it's, well, I'm so grateful to you for what you've done and what you've made possible for me to do as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. So this is very meaningful for me to hear this. And that's my first question. What is meaning? I mean, you're dedicating so much of your time to studying and to teaching about meaning and purpose. How do you define it? What is it?
Meaning is one of the core goals that we have in life. And it's one of the ways, it's one of the macronutrients of happiness, as I like to look at it. Now, everybody in our field, we're all behavioral scientists, which means that we look at the same concepts in compatible but different ways. Happiness, as I describe it to my students, is the pursuit of three things. It's the pursuit of enjoyment, which is related to pleasure, as you talked about in your introduction, of satisfaction, which is the joy that we get of achievement, usually with struggle, and meaning. Meaning, these are the three things that we need to be happy people. We need to enjoy our lives, take satisfaction in our accomplishments, and we need to find the why of our lives, to find the meaning of our lives. That last one is the most elusive. That's the hardest one. And that's the crisis that we see today. I mean, nobody who's looking around thinks, it's great because the whole world is getting happier by the day. We don't think that because the data show that that's not true. And then, of course, the question is why? Why are we not getting happier when our abundance is increasing? And there are lots of reasons that, at least on paper, we should be getting happier. And it has everything to do with the fact that finding meaning in our lives is actually getting harder than it was before. I'm in the middle of a book right now. My new book is about how to find the meaning of your life, but using the science of what we understand about that. So it's a very deep subject, and we can talk about this as much as you want. But really, your question was, okay, what is it? What is meaning? Meaning, the meaning of your life really has three parts to it. Like everything else, a big problem that's too big to get your arms around, you have to break it up into smaller problems. That's what scientists like you and me, Tal, and even the natural scientists, what they do, smaller problems. The three subcomponents of meaning are coherence, purpose, and significance. People use purpose and meaning synonymously. They're not the same. I'll talk about that here in a second. The first part is coherence. And that's the problem of why do things happen the way they do? Simply put, you're going to have a hard time finding the why of your life if everything seems completely chaotic. What's the coherence? Second is purpose. What are the goals and direction? How are you making progress in your life? That's purpose. And last but not least is significance. Why does it matter that you're alive? How would the world be different if you weren't alive? You need answers to those particular questions. And so the search for meaning, what's the meaning of life, is too big. The right questions are, why do things happen the way they do? What are my goals and direction? And why does it matter that I'm alive? Those are the three questions to go in search of. And so when we look psychologically and philosophically at the meaning question, we'll have to look at those three questions.
So it's coherence, purpose, and significance.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I get that, and of course, it's important to start off with these questions. Now, are these questions different in different areas in our lives? Are there different dimensions that you would look at when thinking about meaning, or is it one size fits all?
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt they're different for different people, different cultures, and different points in our lives, which is the reason that this is not a one and done thing. Here's the interesting thing that we find: the problem with searching for meaning is that in our current culture, we're very good at solving complicated problems, and complicated problems are the problems that we use technology largely to solve problems that don't change and solve them once and for all. So technology is very good at solving and making a jet engine. We've solved the problem. Making a toaster, we've solved the problem of getting toast that is just right and the machine doesn't burn your house down. Wonderful. But the questions that we're talking about here of meaning in general, but more generally or more specifically about coherence and purpose and significance, these are not complicated problems. These are complex problems, and I'm not splitting hairs here. Complex problems are easy to understand, but you can't solve them once and for all because they keep changing. And all of the important things in life are complex. They're not complicated. Toasters are not complicated. Love toasters are not important. Love is important. And so all the things that we really, really care about are changing. We understand them, but you have to live them to come up with a temporary solution to them. Your marriage, Tal, is highly complex. It's not complicated at all, right? It's complex, meaning you don't know what the problem is going to be tomorrow, and it's going to be something you don't expect probably, and you're going to need to come up with a fix for it tomorrow. You can't do it today. A football game. I really, really like European football. I'm a real Barcelona fan. I lived in Barcelona for a long time. I married into a Catalan family. Football is great because it's complex. I don't care how fundamentally strong and powerful your computer is. You can't simulate the game. You got to watch the game. That's why it's a beautiful thing. If I'm lonely, that's a complex problem. Social media is a complicated solution that doesn't fix that. It makes it worse. If I want to fall in love, that's a complex problem. Dating apps are complicated solutions. They don't fix that. That's why they don't work very well. And this is really the problem that we have, is that things are changing all the time, and we need to be experts in these complex problems and courageous enough to want to face these complex problems again and again and again, because that's the journey of life.
Yeah, this is a very powerful distinction, which I've not thought about before, between complicated and complex. So just for our audience, I have many more questions to ask you, but I'll ask for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions from our audience for the remaining time. There's a lot of work at Harvard. There's a lot of work in the field of positive psychology, the science of happiness, about the importance of relationships.
Right.
And the words of a work of Waldinger, talking about how relationships are the #1 predictor of a happy life. So where does meaning and relationship meet themselves? And if I can give you a bit of context from where I'm asking this question. So in our work, we divide happiness into the SPIRE elements. SPIRE: spiritual well-being, physical well-being, intellectual, relational, and emotional. Spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. Now, under spiritual well-being, we incorporate a sense of meaning and purpose. Now, many people say to us, but meaning and purpose come from relationships. Why are these two separate? Are they one and the same? Is there a great deal of overlap? What's the relationship between relationships and meaning?
So relationships are everything, because happiness is love. And that's what we find from the work that you just mentioned, the work of Robert Waldinger, who runs something that everybody on this call knows that he runs the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's the longest longitudinal survey of people's lives. It started when people were 18 and 19 years old, and it goes until they die. 85 years so far. And now it's incorporated their spouses and their kids, and it's an unbelievable data set. And what they find is that, if you want to know just one thing about it, happiness is love. Happiness is love, full stop. It has to do with the quality of your relationships, the quality of your friendships, the quality of your marriage, the quality of your relationship with your children and your parents. And that's what you need to work on. And that's really critical, is the way that it works. Okay, so how does it get back to meaning is a real question. I have a diagnostic test, because, you're not going to go around all day thinking about coherence, purpose, and significance all day long. That's just too academic. So I have a 2-question diagnostic exam that I use to see if somebody has a meaning crisis in their life that rolls those 3 things into it all at once, and it's easy to remember. And I give it to my kids. I give it to my students at Harvard. Here it is. Do you want to play, Tal? Do you want to play the?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's question number 1. Why are you alive?
To bring more happiness, to spread happiness in the world.
I like it, because you just told me that you're alive to serve other people. That's relationships. Okay, now you might have answered it in a different way. If you were like an especially religious person, you might have said, God made me to serve, or something like that, right? Because you could have talked about, where you came from. But if you said, I don't know why I'm alive, because a stork brought me, because a sperm and an egg, or some biological explanation, I say, no, sorry. Now we know the problem. Okay, question number 2. For what would you gladly give your life at this moment?
My family.
Your children, your wife, your people, your people, right?
Yeah.
It's relationships, Tal. You answered in the same way. And here's the thing. People who can't answer those questions have a feeling of emptiness. And that feeling of emptiness is a lack of meaning. It's to be bereft of meaning. And so the good news is, for anybody watching us who's feeling that, now you know what to go looking for. You don't have to go looking for meaning, like sitting at the mouth of the cave and asking the guru. No. You have to say, why am I alive? And for what would I be willing to die? And it's like, I've seen this with my own children. I have a son who was, had a difficult adolescence. Like, he was my middle child. And after high school, I said, look, here's the deal. You got to answer these questions. This is your job. How are you going to answer these questions? And he joined the military. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps, and he found his answers, not because of the Marine Corps, but because of the experiences that he had. He became witness to his own actions that showed him the answer. Now he's 24 years old. He's married. He has a baby. He has a great job outside of the military. And his answers are, he believes that God made him to serve other people. And for what would he give his life? He would give his life for his faith, and for his family, and for his fellow Marines, and for the United States of America and our allies, and for those of us on the call. And he's solid because he has witnessed with his own behavior the answers to his 2 queries about that. That's an example. Again, these are not the right answers for people watching us. I'm not propagandizing. I'm reporting my son's answers.
Right.
But if we can find our answers to these questions, then they're always going to revolve around relationships, and we will, to our own satisfaction, understand the why of our lives.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to take us back, Arthur, to I believe it was 1875. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, utters his famous saying, God is dead. Now, when people quote Nietzsche, they often say, oh, he said it with bravado, we have won, science over faith. But if you read, the full text, you realize he was, even though he himself was not a person of faith in the traditional sense, he was very concerned about a world without God. And in many ways, he predicted what we are seeing what we saw in the 20th and what we're seeing in the 21st century, which is nihilism, which is the lack of meaning and purpose. So we have Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And then I believe 2009, William Damon from Stanford published the book, The Path to Purpose, where he talks about essentially the young generation who are, in his words, drifters, who are going through life without a sense of meaning and purpose. And the question is, what's the antidote? Is it the 2 questions? Do we need to do more? What do we do in schools? What do we do in the workplace to bring more coherence, purpose, and significance, to bring more meaning?
Right. Yeah. So how to find meaning in and of itself is sort of the Lewis and Clark question of life, is what it comes down to. Because, that's actually not just a thing to find. That's the journey to start. That's what really matters in all complex things. If you want to answer a complex question, you better dedicate yourself to working on the solution and trying to find the answers over and over and over again for the rest of your life. And that means it's not a destination, it's the journey itself. That's the key thing to understand about these questions. For what would you give your life? Why are you alive? Work on it. That's what it comes down to. And then revisiting it and working on it again and again and again. The impediment to that, Tal. Now, there's actually very interesting new neuroscience that talks about why people are more likely to be drifters. There's a very interesting data that was collected by UCLA that asked, what's your number one goal in college? That asked, the undergraduate, so you've seen these data, going back to the mid-1960s, 1966, number one, 89% said, my number one goal is discovering a meaningful purpose in life. Mm-hmm. Now it's 49%. It's gone down to the second to last category in what people say is an important goal for the undergraduate experience. That is the reason for this emptiness. This is the explanation. It's not these newfangled things about what we're finding. All these activists are telling us that young people are bummed out about what's going on in the world. No. They have less of a sense of meaning and they're not looking. This is what explains the explosion of mood disorders, particularly among young adults. This lies behind depression and anxiety, because if you don't have a sense of meaning and you're not even looking, because looking is finding in this, you're actually going to be suffering from this. Now, it gets into a really interesting new body of neuroscience behind this that's really blowing my mind. And I've never talked about this before, so this is a world premiere, okay? The work of Ian McGilchrist, of course. We all know the work of Ian McGilchrist, the great psychiatrist and neuroscientist, Scottish, who wrote The Master and His Emissary. It's a famous book about the hemispherically lateralized brain. That's by the way, that's wonky nerd speak for your brain has two parts, right and left, and they do different things. That's all that it means. We all learned that, artsy people are on one side, analytical people on the other. That's all nonsense. None of that stuff has stood up to the literature. But Ian McGilchrist has shown that when you are trying to find meaning in your life, you're working on the right hemisphere of your brain. When you're frittering away your time on devices using tech, you're on the left side of your brain. Now, you know where I'm going with this, folks. The more that you are distracted from actually getting into the default mode network in your brain, when you're never bored, when you're never letting your mind wander, you're always using the left side of your brain excessively, and you will be on the right side of your brain, which is the only place where you can think about, work toward these complex questions of meaning. That part of your brain is unavailable to you. Why are young people so bummed out today? Because they're never bored, because they're in the wrong side of their brains all day long. It's a geographical problem.
One of my colleagues who's a child psychologist, her name is Shirley Yuval Yair.
Oh, yeah.
When her children say to her, Mommy, I'm bored, her response is, that's okay, sweetheart. Just be bored with dignity. And I think that's important for us to tell ourselves as well, because when we are bored, when we do have, we should not go to the gadget for immediate gratification.
Right.
We can stay there and be.
For sure. And the thing with your kids, when they say, Mommy, I'm bored, a really good response to that is, yeah, that's really no kidding. Well, I've been wanting to ask you a question. And since you're bored, I'm going to ask you this question. What's the question? Why do good people suffer? Ask a question like that, a big meaning question to your kid. And when the kid does not have the iPad in her hands, and you ask her the philosophical question of meaning, suddenly you'll see all this if you had the kid under fMRI, you'd see a lot of activity on the right side of her brain, and then you're starting to solve the problem.
I love that approach. So what you're saying is that the mere asking of these questions is, at the very least, part of the answer.
Sure. I mean, Lewis and Clark had to say, I wonder if there's the Northwest Passage. If we take the canoe down that river, where's it going to take us? Everything starts with, see, here's the thing about life. all the good things come from asking questions. Sometimes you find answers, but everything good starts with questions. You make no progress unless you're actually asking the questions. And if you're being distracted from the questions, that winds up being the problem.
Mm. So, you know, the topics that you're working on, that you're dealing with, I mean, their root is not psychological. I mean, now psychology has a lot to say about them.
Right.
Neuroscience has a lot to say about them, as you mentioned. But the root is really, you know, religion,
Right.
you know, faith. How do you connect the two?
The truth is that our field, the field that you launched, is the most interdisciplinary field possible because it's the study of human life and human motivation. It really is. And if you do that, then you understand that you have to have a lot of facility across different boundaries. And of course, academia doesn't reward that. That's why your master's degree is so critically important. You know, the Happiness Studies Academy can teach you across fields as opposed to burrowing to the center of the earth. That's why this is not a master's degree in social psychology. It's a master's degree in happiness studies. That's why it's so important. 20% of what I teach is philosophy and theology. 30% of what I teach is neuroscience. 40% of what I teach is social psychology and behavioral economics. And 10% of what I teach is habits and management science. In other words, that's the application that we actually have in life. All of the interesting questions, they come from art, they come from biography, they come from philosophy, they come from religion. Psychologists have never asked interesting questions. They're good at exposing interesting questions to data, but they're not good at asking questions. That's what God created philosophers, to ask questions, and then God created us as social scientists to help answer them with experiments. Then, of course, the neuroscience, when you and I were doing our PhDs, nobody was doing neuroscience in our field. It was just not done. But now everybody is. So we have to retrain in the field of neuroscience. I read probably 15 journal articles in neuroscience a week just so that I can write my column at this point. And that's because you have to understand the mechanism of action, mechanism of causation, and what's happening, given the fact that biology and psychology are inseparable between them. The social psychology, what you and I were trained in, I was trained as a behavioral economist, you as a social psychologist. That's what we use to actually expose these ideas to data using experiments. And then we have to figure out how to apply them in people's lives, either as managers or as parents or as individuals on ourselves. And so if you're not good in those four areas, you're simply not going to be able to get these ideas across to the people who can use them.
Yeah. Final question, Arthur, and then we'll open it up to our audience. What advice would you give someone who's interested in cultivating that number one predictor of happiness, relationships, whether it's romantic relationships, whether it's friendships, both, either? Is there advice based on your work, whether it's your work on meaning, whether it's other work that you have done? How would we go about cultivating that number one generator of happiness?
So there's a technical response and a philosophical response. The technical response is really easy. Stop trying to mediate your complex needs with complicated solutions. Stop looking for the tech solution to your complex human need for love. If you want to meet somebody that you're going to fall in love with, it's going to be a lot better if people that you know start setting you up like in the old days, or hire a matchmaker, I don't care, or go to your house of worship and meet people the old-fashioned way, because that's how complex problems actually get solved in relationships. Go places and meet people. Don't actually think that social media is going to make you less lonely. Don't think that dating apps are going to find you the perfect mate. Why? Because of the technical problem, the complicated versus complex problem. That's number one. Number two, if you crave love, here's the secret. Here's the secret glitch in the matrix. Here's the hack. If you crave love, give love. Give the thing that you want to get. That's the bottom line. And that's the truth. That's sort of true about everything. And this is one of the most beautiful things about life itself, is that if there's something that you want and you give it, magic happens. And again, you and I have seen the experiments that show this. I mean, Adam Waits has done all this really interesting work at Northwestern. And I mean, look, we've all done this where you keep finding that I did work on charitable giving for years and years and years. And I found that the more money you give to charity, the more money you earn in subsequent years. And the more time you volunteer for charities, the happier you get. Why? Because you're giving expressions of service, you're giving expressions of love. So the number one thing, and by the way, your brain lies to you about that. Your brain says that if you're lonely, you should isolate, you should wrap up in a fuzzy blanket with a pint of Haagen-Dazs and watch Netflix by yourself. That's exactly wrong. When you're lonely, go out and talk to people is the way that actually works. And actually find somebody who's lonelier than you and give them the love and companionship that they actually need. And the wheels of the universe will start to turn. And we can explain the social scientific mechanisms and the neuroscience mechanism behind it, but it actually probably is pretty obvious.
Yeah. That's great advice. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you.
I have many more questions to ask, but I will curb my enthusiasm and call on our wonderful audience. And let's begin with Jason. And just before you ask, please make your questions brief, to the point, because we want to get through as many as we can. Jason.
Hey, Jason. Oh, you're on mute.
Jason, we'll call on you in a minute. Let me call on Sandy first, and then I'll call back.
Okay.
Jason. Sandy.
Hi,
Thank
Sandy.
you, Tal. Hi, how are you, Arthur? I'm so honored to have you here in HSA. Thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge. And
Thanks.
I've been following you for a long time also. And I wanted to ask you, I work with organizations. I work, giving them this idea of emotional responsibility. And I talk about love and happiness and fulfillment and whole being within the organization, and that you can have flourishing people and then growing your results. But I find a lot of resistance of these words and these concepts. And I was wondering, what are the biggest barriers you teaching these concepts in Harvard to business people? How do you break those walls or lower those barriers so people are more open to these concepts within the workplace?
Yeah, no, and part of the problem is that our field of happiness studies is populated by people who are extremely non-scientific, Sandy. And so there's way too much self-improvement and not enough science and it's like, if we had 5,000 Tal Ben-Shahars running out there, you would be pushing on an open door, because people would be like, oh, you're a student of Tal Ben-Shahar. Well, but instead they're going to be looking at every internet guru who's got a secret, hack for happiness and a brand new app. There's not an app for that. And so the result of it is that people are selling it in a way that has become suspect. So that's part of the problem. The way to deal with this is to say, I want to talk about happiness. This is a serious subject of science. I teach my class at the Harvard Business School, and it is a Harvard Business School. I mean, these are people who take classes in supply chain management, right? I mean, this is like the most left-brained, complicated place maybe in the world outside the engineering school. But my class has 180 students. It has 400 on the waiting list. It's the most oversubscribed elective at HBS at this point. There's a secret illegal Zoom link they think I'm not aware of this class. Their parents are on this link. Why? Because they want it and they know it's a science class. In other words, what I'm telling you is make it serious and say this is serious stuff. This is not a nice to have. This is the essence of what a good life is all about, but we're going to understand it from the point of view of how the brain works, what social scientists are discovering. We're going to talk about actually the tools that you can use and ways that you can pass it on as well. And the more serious you make it, the more attention you're going to get.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for your work.
Thank you, Sandy and Arthur. Itai.
Thanks, Tal. So good to be here today. I have a question. So, we're in the midst of like political election season, and it feels like the political area is already quite demoralizing and polarizing. I see it among friends, families, even within my own community. I can tolerate other people's opinions, but it seems sometimes they cannot tolerate my views and values. So I wonder what advice you can give us, advice you can give me to survive the next few months. Also, not to compromise what I believe in and the role I feel that I have sometimes to share it with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I've written about that a lot. I actually wrote a book in 2019 called Love Your Enemies. Crazy idea, right? And it's an ancient Jewish and Christian idea that you can actually love people with whom you disagree. No. It's not that you can. You must love those with whom you disagree. But only in making the decision to do that can you change the situation at hand. And I want to make one quick distinction. Love is not a feeling. Happiness is not a feeling. Happiness or feelings are evidence of happiness. Like the smell of your turkey is evidence of your Thanksgiving dinner. And love is not a feeling either. To love is to will the good of the other. This is based on the ideas of Thomas Aquinas and Maimonides. And this is very medieval ideas. To love is to will the good of the other. So Itai, here's the deal. What are you going to do to love people more, notwithstanding your feelings? This is the opportunity. Now, I learned this in a big way from my religious tradition, but I work a lot with the Dalai Lama. I'm not a Buddhist, I'm a Catholic, but I've been working for 11 years with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama told me this. I asked him, Your Holiness, when I feel contempt for somebody else, what should I do? And he said, that's when you should express more love. And I'm like, you got anything else? But then I remembered, look, the Dalai Lama was driven out of his home as a teenager and into exile. And he has spent the last 60 years as the world's most respected religious leader, praying for the people who persecute him. He starts every day praying for them. Not that they'll give him his homeland back, but they'll live good and happy lives. And we can do that too. So the point is basically this, Itai. You don't have to make somebody more civilized toward you. No. More tolerant toward you. You have to love them. And the more disagreement you have with them, the better it's going to be when you proactively love them more. And it's going to be even better if it's going against your feelings, because then you win. Then you actually break down barriers. The number one way to love somebody across a political barrier right now, by the way, is listen. Listen to them with the goal of understanding them. It's kind of easy for me and Tal because we're professional social scientists, and listening to people with weird opinions is kind of what we do for a living. But we can all be social scientists in this point and go to somebody and say, I've never voted like you. I've never thought that way. I want to understand. Lay it on me, man. Lay it on me. And just really listen with compassion and love in your heart. And then you'll be surprised at what happens.
Thank you. You're working on that.
Thank you. I know it's hard. Me too. I'm the only one in my family who has my political views, by the way. Thanksgiving was fun for me as a kid.
It reminds me of the research, the work on servant leadership. And of course, the greatest leaders throughout history were servant leaders, whether you start with Moses and Jesus and Gandhi and Mandela and Anita Roddick. And the number one characteristic of servant leaders is not how eloquent they are, not how brilliant they are, not how strategic they are. It's their ability to listen.
I know.
And that applies to a political leader. It applies to a leader of a family, or a classroom.
Absolute superpower. The number one way to heal your marriage is to start listening.
Nice. And Itai, you didn't even ask for that advice. You got it free of charge. Meg.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah, sure can. Hi, Meg.
Okay. Hi. So nice to meet you, Arthur, via Zoom. And this goes to the point that Tal made at the outset of this, is how Ivory Tower meets Main Street.
Yeah.
And I find it's very interesting because I was even contemplating this morning, is that the ivory tower tries to protect their power structure as separate and apart from Main Street. Mind you, what you wrote with Build the Life You Want with Oprah, who like literally represents talking to Main Street. My question resounds around this. How do both sides become conscious of the fact that they have to start working together so that we can live in a happier state? Because the separation doesn't do us any good. And it's going to be the integration, like you said, the listening to different perspectives that bring us all to the table where we all can offer something, regardless if we have a PhD at the end of our name or not, that will bring people to that notion of what you are saying. What does happiness mean to you? Even starting to question that versus be numb to your life. You know, that's wonderful Rumi quote, you know, the breeze has things to offer. Don't go back to sleep. And I think that we all need to wake up to what is so that we can move from that place to better understanding of each other. My question is to you, you're from Harvard. I mean, people say the H-bomb, right? They, you know, they drop it and people quiet, or they engage you as if you have a superpower, when the reality is to attract all of us to the table is a beautiful gift.
Yeah. So Tal taught at Harvard for a long time too, and yes. And it's a really weird job. Like, no joke, it's the weirdest job in the world, precisely because you know, people think that anything you're going to say is smart, which of course is nuts. It's crazy. It's not true. I mean, presumably we have a level of expertise in our own fields and we don't say things that are wrong. But you know, this is one of the reasons that people will go to a Harvard professor of psychology or music and ask their opinion about politics, and they don't have the slightest idea what they're talking about. That, you know, they'll ask an economist about politics, and people get out of the silo. Why? Because we have this hubris based on the fact that people think that since you're smart enough, you must be an expert in everything. That's a human tendency. That's not just a Harvard tendency. And just in general, the real question is this: every single one of us on this call, we all have these gifts, this influence. We're all leaders in our way, and we're given these leadership abilities and these leadership privileges for a reason. What is it? Is it to feather your own nest, to feel good about yourself, to get the admiration of other people, to have more power, to increase your income? I hope not. I hope that each one of us uses the leadership, at least the reputation with which we're endowed, to lift people up and bring them together. That's what we should be doing. That's why it's so admirable that Tal left Harvard and he's running the Happiness Studies Academy, which is democratizing these big ideas. And that's what I'm trying to do too. I'm in the business of public education. I'm trying to bring the academy to the world because the world actually needs these ideas. Now, if I were teaching material science in the engineering school, I might not be able to do that in the same way. If I were a professor of tropical animal husbandry, it might not be the kind of thing that, you know, everybody wants to get on a Zoom call and talk about, right? But I'm in a field that everybody wants something of, and so it's my opportunity, it's my privilege to be able to talk about it in a way that actually democratizes it. Now, then there's one other thing, which is that there's no community that rewards that so very much. I've had to kind of roll my own. I couldn't have done it when I was 30. When I was 30 years old or 35 years old and I was just starting out, I couldn't have done this because I wouldn't have gotten tenure. You know, I wouldn't have, I was writing academic journal articles that were so mathematically complex, I can't read them today. But now I'm 60 and I'm like, no, sorry, you know, and all of us need to use the circumstances that are under our control and the privilege that we're granted to do the most good that we possibly can in a spirit of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder, Arthur, you know, you were saying you were writing complex papers. Now you're dealing with complicated.
They were actually complicated
problems.
papers, Tal. You're right. Very nice. Well played, sir.
Yeah, no, but what I think is maybe, you know, the foundation of, you know, complex thinking, or what can help our complex thinking, is when we learn the complicated, and vice versa.
Right.
So they're not parallel lines necessarily.
No. And there are ways in which the problems are motivated by complex issues that we have in life. And then there's certain things that we need to do, like raise our kids and make a living and, you know, create cars and airplanes and all that complicated stuff. That's great. But you don't mix up the problems. You don't want to mix up the problems. You don't want to wish away with questions of meaning the ability to have a safe jet aircraft. And you certainly don't want to do something radically stupid, like thinking that social media is going to make you less lonely.
Right. Thank you for that. Jason, I'm coming back to you.
Thank you so much. Hey, it is an honor to be part of this. I so much appreciate all of this. Dr. Arthur Brooks, my specific question is, with the benefits of the SPIRE elements, the practice, focusing on the direction of happiness, the Blue Zones proposes, among other things, that certain environments may be happier. I am going to announce right now that I'm going to be accepting a job and relocating from Washington to Miami. And I get it that I will be traveling with all of the thorny, encumbered baggage that I have. But to what extent do you think environment factors into our practices in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so I know, I mean, Tal and I are friends with Dan Buettner, so we know that stuff about the Blue Zones and how all of that works. It really comes down to a couple of things. The Blue Zones, for those of you who are not aware, I guess everybody in the world is aware of it now, but there's certain zones around the world where people live a high quality, long life, much longer and higher quality with respect to life satisfaction than average. And, you know, Loma Linda, California, Sardinia, Okinawa, there's places around the world, a place in Greece, et cetera, et cetera. Here's kind of what they all have in common. Number one is there's a secret ingredient for raising their happiness. And number two, there's a secret ingredient for managing their unhappiness. Now, to begin with, happiness and unhappiness are not opposites. They're largely governed by processes in opposite sides of the limbic system of the brain. And so you can be an unusually happy and an unusually unhappy person. That's me, by the way. That's called the mad scientist affect profile. And you can be low, high, high, low, low, low. I mean, it's like people are made differently, but you have to know what your challenges are. In these Blue Zones, you find that people have lots of close, dense friendship and family networks, lots of love, which raises happiness. They also tend to be very active, walk a lot, and they're ambulatory, which is the single best way for you to manage your negative affect. If you suffer from a lot of worry and stress and anger and sadness, etc., the worst way to deal with it is drugs and alcohol. The second worst way to deal with it is workaholism. The best way to deal with it is diet and exercise. And so that's what they have in common. They have these in their culture, a really good way that systematically raises happiness and a systematically good way to lower unhappiness. And that's what the Blue Zones have in common. So you're going to go to Miami. I don't care if you're going to Akron. You can go to Edmonton. You can go to Columbus or Columbia, man. Good. And that's great. But you can make your Blue Zone. The way you make your Blue Zone is lots of friends, stay in touch with your family, stay in love with your spouse, talk to your kids every day, do whatever you need to do, and make sure that your diet and exercise are on point and you've got yourself, welcome to Okinawa or Sardinia or your own little Blue Zone.
Yeah, I like that, creating your own Blue Zone. You know, Arthur, based on what you just said and what you said earlier, what I often tell my the students of the happiness studies or the grads is that the most important thing about the program is not the content. You know, the content, of course, is amazing. That's very easy. When you read Aristotle and Lao Tzu and Marianne Evans and Helen Keller and Sonia Lubomirsky and Marty Seligman, you'll have great content. Yeah. Not a problem. But the biggest, most important aspect of the Happiness Studies Academy is the community. Because that is what will encourage you to take on something meaningful that maybe you were afraid to. That is the community that will listen to you, where you're able to give love and to receive love. So it really is about creating your own community. And again, it can be an organization. It can be a city. or a place like Okinawa, or it could be a building because of you who's creating relationships within that building and helping people open up. Because we
Right.
know, and Ellen Langer does a lot of research on this, that emotions and behaviors are contagious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Emotional contagion is a real thing. And you want to be in a community where positive emotion is spreading
Dominant.
and not negative emotion. I mean,
Yeah.
there's always negative emotion, by the way. The biggest mistake the biggest piece of, as they say, fake news that we're giving to young people today is by pathologizing negative emotion and telling them there's something wrong, medically wrong with them because they feel sad and anxious. On my first day of class at the Harvard Business School, I say, look, your graduate students at Harvard, if you're not sad and anxious, then you need therapy. And the reason is because I don't want everybody who's upset to be running off and saying something's broken and pathological about me. You need to learn to manage your negative emotion so it doesn't manage you, is really what we're talking.
Right. Thank you. Sophia.
Hi, Tal. Hi, Arthur. Thank you
Hey.
for this conversation. I've been doing market research for the past 18 years, more or less. And the best questions that I got, it's from my children. So I have a 5-year-old, his name is Mikhail, and he asked the other day, I was driving home and he asked, Mom, what does it feel to be you? And I was like, okay. That's in Spanish, because I'm from Mexico, but I live in the United States. But that was in Spanish. And I didn't know how to answer, but I asked to him, like, how does it feel to be you, Mikhail? And he was like, it feels amazing, just in a bit. And why is that? And that was that struck me. It's because I feel joy. And it was immediate when he answered that. And then I reminded I don't know if you watch Inside Out, when Joy is saying that adults feel less joy. And I have everything. I have everything in my life, friends, family, work, and I feel joy, but I can't answer. And I know he's a kid, but do we lose that spark or that joy when we're adults? Because the way he answered, it was just, I was really amazed.
That is, so tell me, how did he ask the question in Spanish? What did he say in Spanish?
¿Qué se siente ser tú?
Yeah, ¿cómo se siente ser tú? That's it's a very profound question, isn't it? Because what he's sensing is that you can't put yourself in the place of another effectively when it comes down to these questions that kids have are largely driven out of us in no small part because we are relegating more and more and more of our life to the part of the brain that's not occupied with meaning questions. And so what you find is that this is not a childlikeness, this is a humanness that we have. Our state of nature is for all of the questions that really occur to us, to the provenance of them, to start in the right hemisphere of the brain. That's really where questions are supposed to start. But increasingly, as we get older and we're more distracted and we're worse and worse and worse about letting ourselves be bored for a second, the questions that start occurring to us become more mechanical. They become more pedestrian. They become more practical over and over again. And therefore, they're less meaningful than they were actually in the past. What each of us will find in ourselves is the extent to which we allow ourselves not to be governed by the distractions in life, that these questions will start to occur to us again. And you'll start to ask questions like, I wonder what it feels like. I wonder what it feels like to be Sophia. I wonder what it feels like. But not if you're glued to your device. Not if you're only looking at your computer terminal, and not if you're only actually paying attention to the data that are coming across your feed.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You know, and Sophia, I'm thinking about Arthur's response from earlier about how do you generate meaning, and he says that part of the answer is asking the questions. And if you look at adults or elderly individuals who seem to be experiencing joy in life, very often they're also the ones who are very curious about life. In other words, they're always asking questions. So part of the answer to your question is to ask questions. Again, question like your son asked, and other philosophical, existential questions, and they in and of themselves will generate more of that joy, excitement, and of course meaning.
There's a whole school that actually does that, that teaches the meaning of life on the basis of strange, unanswerable questions, which of course is Zen Buddhism. The training in Zen Buddhism is based around koans, which are riddles. What is the sound of one hand clapping, for example? Which of course has an answer. The answer turns out to be, it's an illusion. It looks like it should make a sound, but it actually doesn't. And it becomes a reality and not an illusion when you add the second hand. And the same thing is true for Sophia. Sophia doesn't exist in isolation. She starts to exist in a meaningful human sense when she's with her son. But it's the question per se that actually, that motivates that illuminating truth.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sophia. So we'll go on for another 10 minutes or so. We won't get to everyone, so I'm going to jump around in terms of the questions. I'm going to call on Joe Brady.
Thank you, Tal, and hello, Arthur. How are you?
Hey, Joe.
I love the fact, it doesn't surprise me that you're working on yet another book, but can you talk a bit about meaning and what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities you see in this approach? And then likewise, meaning being so profound, you and I've talked about college-aged men in particular. How do we focus on teaching meaning at a younger and younger age?
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, we actually need to introduce the concepts to younger and younger people. We actually have to ask questions that are deeper and more profound, as opposed to the trivial, I should say not trivial, but the practical questions that we're doing. So right now, what are we telling young people? If you're not studying STEM, you're not getting an education, right? If it, like, learn to code, that's what we tell young people. It's like, no. Code, fine. If you're into coding, it's really, really great. Read the Bible. That's what we should be telling young people. We're going to talk about Aristotle. We're going to ask big questions. So number one, we need to actually start introducing serious questions that don't have clear answers, as opposed to only asking questions that have mathematically clear answers that never change. Why? Because we have to stop only asking complicated questions. We have to start asking complex questions. Second, for young people in particular, and by young people, I mean all the way through college, we need policies where they have distraction-free zones. It is insane, my friends, that there's a single public school in any of our countries where you're allowed to bring your smartphone. That is insane. There should be not one smartphone in any school. And we have the technology. And by the way, this is super. I used to run a think tank, a public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. I'm all about how to turn stuff into policy. You know how you do this? And I've done this with the governor of Utah relatively recently. The governor has a proclamation ordering all public schools in her or his state to make cell phones unavailable to students during the school day. And then all the superintendents can blame the governor, and then the principals can blame the superintendents, and they can lock them down at the beginning of the day. And there's actually companies making phone lockers that they're selling really, really cheap to public schools. These are easy things to do. And in so doing, there's a zone for 6 hours a day where not every single moment is being sucked up, literally changing the physical structure of their brain. So number one, start asking real questions. Number two, start putting rules in place that give people the space to actually develop the right side of their brains, for God's sake, before they become a lost cause.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Maria.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Tal. Thank you for calling on me. It's a huge honor, Arthur. It's very nice to meet you.
Thanks.
So my question is, the science of happiness is frequently criticized because of it being like too much in our heads. We are thinking we have to change how we think, but it's like actually in the opinions of the critics, it's promoting disregard to systemic changes. And in your 2008 book, Gross National Happiness, you actually started exploring the topic of happiness from the point of view of systemic change. So I'm wondering, what is your view on the role of the state, of the government now, with regard to promoting happiness and creating conditions for happiness for citizens of a country, for example? Does America need a happiness minister, for example?
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a good question. My thinking has really changed on this subject as I've become better aware of what we can and can't do. So for the longest time, I really wanted public policies that promoted happiness, and I wanted policymakers that were dedicated to raising the happiness of citizens. And let me tell you why I think that's the wrong approach. I was shooting a film on happiness some years ago. It was a documentary film. It's not that great, but during in the process of doing that, I spent some time in Denmark because, I don't believe in these happiness rankings. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And there's all kinds of reasons, like the word is translated different in different languages, and there's cultural biases against answering questions in particular ways, and the way that they, but every, Denmark always comes out really high. So for the purpose of the film, because I'm, Hollywood, I went to Denmark and I got to meet the Speaker of the Danish Parliament. As a socialist guy, and he's all about this kind of stuff. And I said, so happiest country. And by the way, my grandparents were immigrants from Denmark. So, okay. And I said, so you're the happiest country in the world. He says, yeah, so they say. And I said, what are you doing with the government, with this socialist government, to make happiness more available to more people? He says, no, we don't. I said, what are you talking about? I said, no. Government can't bring more happiness. And I said, oh my God, this is revolutionary. I got this on film. He said, no. Then he said something incredibly profound that changed my way of thinking. He said, but the government can eliminate the sources of unhappiness and the barriers to happiness. That's super profound, right? Because that's exactly what public policies should be good at. Look, what are the practices and the habits of the happiest people? They practice their faith or life philosophy. They have strong family relationships. They have close friendships. They have meaningful work. Faith, family, friends, and work. Those are the big practices. They're the big habits, right? They all relate to SPIRE, by the way, right? And what is the government really, really bad at is making those things easier. So what the government should be in the process of doing is making those things easier for people. I don't want the government to have a special bureau for worship. I don't want that. I don't want the government to, be promoting a certain way of living your life. I just want them to get out of the way of these love relationships, getting out of the way of these sources of happiness. And that turns out to be the secret. It's a negative thing in a weird way. So if I were president of the United States, God forbid, if I were president of the United States, I would wake up every single day and I would say, what am I going to do today to make it easier for people to practice their faith? What am I going to do today to make it easier for people to raise their kids and fall in love and get married? What am I going to do today to make communities stronger so they can have friendships? What can I do today to not disincentivize work through our welfare programs? Because that leads to despair and a lack of dignity. And that's what I would do. So that's my answer to that question. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's more of a laissez-faire approach, right?
Well, kind of laissez-faire, but I would do a lot.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that answer. And it makes me think of Maria Montessori when she talks about education. And what she essentially says very often is get out of the way.
Yeah.
Don't tell your child, oh, you're amazing, you're great. Just let them be focused on whatever it is that they're doing. Don't do for the child what they can do for themselves. Get out of their way. And so much of it, and whether you're talking about children or whether you're talking about, government and adults.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right. Don't create impediments to the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, to the natural pursuit of happiness. Sophia. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Very good.
Hi.
How are you? Sorry, I'm letting a quiz. I hope I managed to talk. I'm so excited for this. It's actually a surreal moment for me. Is there an echo on your end?
There's an echo on our end.
There is an echo, yes.
Oh,
So I'll call you back. I'll call you back, see if you can fix that. Thank you. Pablo.
Hello, Tal. I'm
Pablo.
very happy.
Once again, Sophia, can you mute yourself, please? Not you, Pablo. Sophia. Okay.
I'm very happy here. Thank you, Arthur. It blows my mind hearing everything you are saying, telling us. I thought when you told us about questions about the Talmud saying of the Greeks and Socrates, but the question I have a lot of questions, but I just want to make one real question. In my own complex journey of life, something I learned is that if you want to love, the other side of the coin is suffering. So my question for you is, what do you think about that? What do you see in our culture? Because I think that there is a problem with how the people love, because one of the signs of our times is that people not just only don't want to suffer, but don't know how to suffer. And someone who doesn't know how to suffer doesn't know how to love. I want to hear something from you, Arthur, about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo. Are you Argentine? Where are you from, Pablo?
I beg your pardon?
Where are you from?
I'm from Brazil, son of Argentinians.
Yeah.
My parents are Belgian, Italian.
Yeah, I can tell because I mean, I was going to say
Catholic. Yes.
Yeah, Argentine. There's an expression in I lived in Spain for a long time. There's an expression in Spanish, la santificación del sufrimiento, and what that means is that there is a saintliness to suffering, but only if we endow it with the importance that it really has. Here's the great irony. I talk about happiness in terms of enjoyment and satisfaction and meaning. You don't get enjoyment through pure pleasure. You have to defer your gratification. You don't get satisfaction by getting what you want and keeping it forever. On the contrary, it requires struggle, or it won't bring any satisfaction at all. And meaning, you don't find meaning except through barriers and problems and sadness and pain, right? You don't. I mean, if I asked you, Pablo, tell me the most meaning, tell me how you understood the meaning in your life. You'd tell me about somebody dying. You'd tell me about fear. You'd tell me about getting sick. The truth of the matter is that the way to happiness goes through unhappiness. If you're trying to avoid your unhappiness, you will avoid your happiness. That's just the fact. Now, happiness is love, so it's the same thing that you're talking about. But this is the most important thing, that our current obsession with the elimination of suffering, this is making life empty for an entire generation of young people. Now there's a practical argument about this as well. There are only really 4 negative emotions: sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. If you didn't feel those things, you'd be dead in a week. Those things exist to keep you alive and for your survival and for your protection. So you better have lots of negative emotions. And that means that pure happiness is not in your future. You need to learn how to manage these things, but you can't eliminate these things. And if you didn't have negative experiences, you'd learn nothing. You'd grow not at all. And the result is that your life would not be more meaningful. And that's the argument for saying that you need to make your peace with your suffering. And okay, my students always ask, because I make my students repeat, my suffering is sacred. I make them say that. And inevitably one will say, so professor, Do I need to go look for suffering? And I say, don't worry, it will find you. The question is what you do when it does.
Yeah, there's a beautiful quote that comes to mind by Golda Meir, which is, those who don't know how to weep with their whole heart don't know how to laugh either.
Yeah.
And these are two sides of the same coin.
Our goal is not feeling good all the time. Our goal is to be fully alive every single day, completely awake. That's the secret.
Thank you very much, Arthur.
Thank you, Pablo.
Steph.
Yay, I made it. Thank you for this. And thank you, Arthur, for being here.
Of course.
So I heard a term a couple weeks ago, which was a good kid in recovery. And I swear when I heard it and I listened to the description, I started to cry because I felt so seen. So this woman was describing about the good kids in this recovery, who feel like they're a burden, who feel that they are never enough, who feel that they are like, who are always overachieving because they feel like their love is conditional. And I see a lot of that around me. And what I see is that a lot of them stay kind of in track based on the expectations of the people that surround them. And maybe a few try to seek their true path, which is hard. And because these kids that later are adults base their sense of love or their belonging, their faith in when everything goes well. When things don't go well, they feel lost. They feel empty. They actually lose their faith. So my question is, and because you're such a spiritual person and put so much weight on meaning and significance, how can we help them, get back this sense of belonging, of being seen, but and overall of love, that it's, I guess, the core of everything.
So that's a very, very deep question, both on the biochemical side and on the philosophical side. And I know you meant it from a philosophical perspective, but let me start with a little tiny bit of biology about this. There's an emerging body of literature that shows that people who are real strivers, the good kid, the kid who's always doing the best, that they get their sense of reward from success. And now this is the same kind of reward, the same biochemical reward that people get from drugs and alcohol. This is all having to do with dopamine, which is the neuromodulator of the anticipation reward.
We think it works.
And what we find is that in this new literature, that there's a lot of people who from a very young age get their sense of life satisfaction, their sense of reward, the sense of, the reward centers in the limbic system of their brain are activated. They're stimulated when somebody's telling them that they did a good job. When they get the reward when somebody pats them on the head, they get the cookie for getting an A in class, and then this usually goes on to become workaholism, success addiction, self-objectification. It's a lifelong addictive process. That's the first thing to keep in mind. So when you talk about the good kid syndrome, you're talking about a kind of an embryonic kind of actual biological addiction. That's usually facilitated by parents whose love kind of is conditional. And that leads to the second part, which we're really addressing. This is a relationship. Every addiction is a relationship. Some of you on this call have had trouble with alcohol. How do I know that? Because the statistics don't lie. A lot of people do. And when you're trying to stop drinking, you notice that you feel bereft of a sense of love in your life. Why? Because an addiction is something that reliably loves you. That's how you get a sense of the satisfaction that comes, the fulfillment that actually comes. The way to stop an addiction, a chemical addiction, I mean, there's lots of things that you need to do. You need to go to rehab, and et cetera, et cetera. But the most reliable way to get away from a chemical addiction is to have more love in your life. This is the reason that heroin addicts can't kick the habit unless they have somebody who truly loves them. Okay, back to the case at hand. How does a good kid go into recovery? By having somebody who loves her unconditionally. That's it. That's how you do it. Because you need somebody's love even when you don't actually get that hit of success. That's actually the way that it gets done. And that's what you need to be around the people who give that to you. You need to demand that from the people who can actually provide that to you. You need to be in a relationship with the people who don't only love you because of the success that you can bring, the money that you can bring, the fame that you can bring, whatever it is that you can bring that's exogenous.
The answer is love, once again.
Again, it comes down to relationships. Yet again, that's the theme.
Mm-hmm. Let's try again, Sophia. Can you unmute yourself, please?
There we go. I hope it's not great.
Perfect.
Lovely. Thank you. I was saying earlier, this moment is so surreal to me because I'm a happiness speaker. I'm a happiness coach. And I started this path blindly by myself last year. And along the way, you meet your community. And I love that community is the biggest term for tonight. I got to know about your Tal through governor. I'm from Nairobi in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
So the former governor is part of the HSA team. And what are the odds? Tomorrow I'll be a member of his community. He came back and created Happiness Society of Kenya. So it's extremely wonderful to be a part of the HSA. And I hope to also graduate from there sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Arthur, I got to know him through Oprah. I'm a big fan of reading books and I read a lot of Oprah's books. So when Build Your Life came out, I got to know about Arthur. So this moment is so surreal to me. My question is on how do you measure happiness in an organization? So I've been having a couple of sessions with HRs of companies, and it's a question that keeps coming up. How do they get to measure that? So I've related before with the NPS score because the first customer is always the employee, but they're more into the assessment need. I would love to hear more on how you've interacted with that before and how that would look like over and beyond the employee surveys. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that really kind, your really kind enthusiasm for my work in Tal. So Tal has done a lot of work with companies and understands an awful lot about assessment, I know. And I've been thinking about that a lot too. I've been partnering with a company called Irrational Capital of late, and their whole thing is actually measuring the contentment and satisfaction that people feel inside organizations. And the reason that I trust their data is because they're actually setting up an investment vehicle for the companies that are scoring best. This is called an electronically traded fund, an ETF, based on the companies that have the highest internal satisfaction ratings. And so if you go to the website of Irrational Capital, you can look at the kind of stuff that they're actually measuring, and you can look at how they're measuring it. And that's really a good thing because measurement it's a nightmare. Why? Because measurement is a complicated thing, and we're trying to get at a complex thing. And when you're trying to measure a complex thing with a complicated survey, well, good luck to you. That's the nightmare for me and Tal across all of our research. Is we call it construct validity, but it's just complicated versus complex is the way that works out. So these guys at Irrational Capital are doing a better job than most other organizations that I've seen. Do you want to add something to that, Tal? What are you seeing these days that really works?
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge. And the way I deal with it is that I frame scales and questionnaires in general as awareness raisers. That's what they do. You know, if you do the MBTI, you're not a certain type, but what it can do for you is help you raise levels of awareness about how you behave around people. If you measure happiness in an organization, you know, your organization is not a 7.1. However, let's raise levels of awareness about measuring it so that we can do things to increase it. In the same way, that's why national measurements of happiness are important, because of the conversations that we have around it.
Yeah, I agree. So good luck with that, and good luck with your work, Sophia. I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you. So we have time for one more, unfortunately. So Sandy, if...
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much. Good to see you again, Arthur.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. So I just love that you start with a foundation of theology and philosophy for teaching happiness. And of course, Tal's program does that as well.
Yeah.
In this kind of postmodern, very secular society where there's kind of subjective ideas of truth and everyone's trying to build their moral compass based on their own feelings of empathy. How do you get buy-in from students to say, okay, this isn't actually a foundation that I need for life? And then how do you get buy-in from teachers to be able to teach things like the Bible or the Tao Te Ching without saying this is the only interpretation for this text?
So that's a great question. Thank you, Sandy. The answer to that is that the conversation stopper in modern life is saying that the answer comes from philosophy or theology. The conversation starter is that the question comes from there. So that's how you just reverse the whole algorithm. So you don't say, look, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. Nobody's going to put up with that. Nobody's taking a class at Harvard for that. You know, they don't go to the Happiness Studies Academy to hear Tal say, you know, I don't know. It's like, let me find the answer to your question. It's right here. He's going to start reading from the Torah. No, that's not going to get the job done. That's not why he has a PhD in social psychology. But the interesting questions are coming from these sources, and everybody knows that. Now, the way that I do this in my class is I don't just use the same source again and again and again and again. I use the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I use the Summa Theologia of Thomas Aquinas, and I use the Talmud, and I use the Bhagavad Gita, and by the way, I also use Schopenhauer, and I use Nietzsche, and I use all it, not because they have the solutions, but because they have the questions that motivate the journey, that motivate the search for truth, the ongoing and everlasting search for the changing and dynamic and exciting answers to the complex questions in and of themselves. So don't finish it with those sources. Just start it with those sources, and then you'll be shocked at the openness. I mean, I'm just like, there's zero pushback. It's the most amazing thing. You know, my last day of class this semester, you know, we do the class evaluations, and then we have an AMA, and Ask Me Anything. And because there's no way that I can do that over the course of the class because it's too busy, right? But and then afterward, and the first guy, a really smart guy, real wise guy, puts up his hand. And I said, yeah. He said, everybody knows that you're a religious guy because, you know, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not just a Catholic. I go to mass every day, right? So I'm pretty traditional and religious. He said, but you never pushed it on us one time. Why not? If you're so convicted in your faith. And I said, well, now that the evaluations are behind us, I said, there's a brochure under all your seats. No, I didn't say that. So, and I said, look, my job is to start your journey. My job is not to finish your journey. I'm on my journey. I like mine. I invite you to join me on mine. But it's got to be yours, is the way that actually works. And I'm not trying to sell them a Buick. On the contrary, I'm trying to teach them to drive.
Right. Excellent.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
You know, Arthur, every Thursday as a community, we meet online, sometimes in person, but mostly online. And we address different topics. And the idea that came up, and it's an AMA, Ask Me Anything kind of meeting. What came up was a quote that I thought about almost from the get-go in terms of your answer and or your answers and your answers around answers. And I want to send this this quote by Rilke, who's another one of the great thinkers, the sensitive hearts and profound minds. And I'm sending it in the chat so everyone can follow as I read it. He writes, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue, do not now seek the answers which you cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is, to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And this is what I felt as we were conversing, that you took us along more questions than answers, but through these questions, we traveled in the direction of more meaning and more purpose. Just spending time with you always is so meaningful, so profound. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for the work, Tal. Your work has, like I said before, had this profound influence on me and every single one of us here. And we're doing our best to take your movement forward to build a world that has more happiness and love. And this has a happier world has Tal Ben-Shahar's fingerprints on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. So, to love. Take care, everyone, of yourselves and others. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.